Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Sami here. Today we are gonna see, what if, depressed Naruto x Part 2, hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start please subscribe to our channel, and like this video. So let's get into the video. Pen poised readily over her notebook, quickly scanned the lines of a particularly thick book, looking for the things on the list sitting on the coffee table in front of her. Thanks to God giving Naruto a cheat sheet containing most of the things that would be on the test, her study time had literally been cut in half. Her eyes quickly shot from her book to the blonde studying on the other end of the couch. The night before, she and Naruto had had a surprisingly long conversation about, well, everything. People they knew, missions they'd been on, dreams, nightmares, everything. The two of them had talked well into the early hours of the morning, and the only reason it ended when it did, was because Naruto's words had begun to slur and run together. Apparently 3 in the morning was his cutoff point, and it was amusing to watch his chin fall into his chest every few seconds, as he tried to stay awake. There had been almost no awkward silences. When one of them stopped talking, the other would jump in immediately with an opinion or story of their own, keeping things going at a frantic, feverish pace. She idly rubbed at her jaw, a bit surprised that it was actually sore from talking so much. She could gab with the best of them, and this was the first time she could remember this ever happening. Her eyes wandered to the clock on the wall, and eyes widening, she realized that it was 2:45. Oh, shit. She yelled, hopping to her feet. Concerned, Naruto snapped his head up to stare at her. What? I'm supposed to meet Sakura at 3. She said it was important. Naruto frowned, and threw his book on the coffee table, visibly pouting at the fact that she was leaving. Noticing this, the kunoichi raised her eyebrows. You can keep studying, Ino said, tidying up her area. It's no fun studying by myself, he grumbled, poking out his lower lip. I won't be back for a few hours. What are you going to do with yourself until then? He shrugged his shoulders, and leaned back on the couch, eliciting an exasperated sigh from his temporary roommate. Oh, quit moping. I'll be back in time to make you dinner. Okay. When Naruto didn't respond, she rolled her eyes, and walked into her room to change. Just when she was starting to see him in a new light, he reverted back into the same, immature Naruto she'd always known. After cleaning up and getting dressed, Ino hurried to the door, and opened it, glancing over her shoulder to look at him. Later, she said, waving her hand in his direction. Predictably, Naruto didn't say anything, preferring to simply stare blankly at the wall. Rolling her eyes one last time, Ino walked through the door, and closed it behind her, leaving him to stew in his own irrational anger. Sai asked me to be his girlfriend. Ino choked on her tea, nearly spurting the warm liquid all over the table. She and Sakura were currently sitting near the window in the same new cafe they'd been in earlier that week, enjoying a cup of black tea, and a plate of cookies. Or, at least they had been enjoying them until the Hokage's apprentice dropped the bombshell of all bombshells. What that Sai wants you to be his girlfriend, what did you say? Sakura shrugged her shoulders. Well, we had fun on the date, so I agreed. The blonde stared at her friend in complete utter shock, but he's Sai. The one who called you an ugly bitch. Remember that? Oh, come on, Ino. That was like 2 years ago. He wasn't used to human contact back then. Maybe so, but... Sensing that there was a bigger reason behind Ino's reluctance to accept their relationship, Sakura went on the offensive. Why are you so against this, anyway? Are you sure you still don't have feelings for him? Shocked by the accusation, Ino quickly opened her mouth to defend herself. It's not me, but Naruto. She'd almost given up Naruto's secret. Not that it was much of a secret to everyone else, but Sakura, apparently. What? Her friend pressed, leaning forward, as if she smelled blood. I just think that you need to put a little more thought into this. Sai is not good for you. I don't know why he's taken such a sudden interest in you, but you will regret this decision. Sakura leaned back and frowned, crossing her arms indignantly. Just drop it. I thought you'd be a little happier for me, but I guess I was wrong. Ino sighed, and tiredly placed her palm against her forehead. Sakura. She honestly couldn't understand her friend's thought process. There was no possible way that she didn't know about Naruto's crush on her, and for her to completely ignore his feelings was just, well, low. Especially given their history together. Still, it wasn't her problem, and there was no sense getting Sakura upset when it didn't even concern herself. Whatever, you're right. Let's just drop it. From there the conversation fell into the usual gossip about who was screwing who, but all Ino could think about was the boy sitting at home alone, oblivious to the news she would impart on him later that evening. Slowly opening the door, Ino hoped against hope that Naruto had somehow gotten tired, and decided to go to bed a few hours early. Unsurprisingly, he hadn't. You're back. What did Sakura want? How did her date with Psycho? Did you ask? Naruto asked, hopping around her like a puppy greeting its master. Ino winced. Watching him wag his tail made her even more reluctant to tell him, and knowing his personality, she smiled, and headed for the kitchen first. She figured the news would be easier to swallow on a full stomach. I'll tell you about it after dinner. Frowning, Naruto followed. Why can't you tell me now? Ino didn't answer, so he sped up until he was walking side by side with her. Ino, what did she say? Again she ignored him, and again he sped up until he was standing directly in front of her, backtracking, as they walked into the kitchen. Ino, why are you? Annoyed, Ino turned her head to glare at him. Fine. You really want to know. Sakura and Sai are going out. For a few seconds, Naruto didn't move. His face was oddly devoid of any emotion, scaring her a little. Normally, this was the point where a person snapped. She'd seen it happen at least half a dozen times on missions, and while she was almost certain that he wouldn't do anything stupid, one could never be sure when it came to shinobi. Swallowing roughly, she pasted on a grin. So, what do you want for dinner? You can name anything you want, but I can't guarantee its taste if it's something I've never made before. His face finally changing, the young man frowned and turned his head away. No thanks. I'm not that hungry. Ino sighed loudly. Come on, Naruto, it's not the end of the world, she said, reaching her hand out in an attempt to comfort him. He backed away from her and glared down at his feet. Forget it, I don't care anymore. Naruto. I said forget it. A tense silence followed his outburst, both of them equally shocked by his tone. Gritting his teeth, Naruto stalked off towards his room, slamming the door behind him. Ino frowned. She tried to be nice. She tried to hold back her temper. However, his passive-aggressive bullshit attitude was really starting to piss her off. Being yelled at and disrespected were two of the few things that she didn't tolerate, and the only reason he was still breathing was because she knew exactly what he was feeling at the moment. It annoyed her, but in a sick, twisted sort of way, she was happy to see that he could feel something more than happiness. Naruto had always come off as an incorrigibly chipper guy, a person who didn't have any worries, and wasted time chasing after impossible dreams. He actually seemed like a human now. Unable to believe what she was about to do, she walked into the kitchen and began to look through the cupboards for some flour. Since she liked to eat her favorite foods whenever she was feeling down, ice cream, fried beef, cake, deep-fried pickles, she figured Naruto would be the same. She'd never tried making ramen from scratch before, but hopefully, the gesture alone would be enough to cheer him up. At the very least, she could try to take advantage of his current mental state to suit her own selfish needs. She spent the next hour measuring, cutting, chopping, and cooking the dish, actually putting some effort into making him some ramen. When she finished, she smiled and placed the steaming bowl on a tray before walking towards Naruto's bedroom. Rather than knock first, she simply twisted the doorknob, unsurprised to find it unlocked. The effect of slamming a door was significantly lessened if a person paused long enough to lock it behind them, after all. Ino used her shoulder to push the door open all the way, flooding the dark room with light. Giving her eyes a few seconds to adjust, she was eventually able to pick out Naruto's shadowed form on the bed. She sat down next to his head and put the tray down beside her. Eat something. I made you ramen, she said, hoping the mention of his favorite food would be enough to get his attention. The young man murmured something that sounded suspiciously like get out, and rolled over, turning his body away from her. Unperturbed, Ino grabbed his shoulders and rolled him back over until he was facing her again. I'm not leaving until you talk to me. Their eyes met in a fierce staring battle, both too stubborn to be the first one to back down. Realizing that the kunoichi wasn't going to leave until he spoke, Naruto sighed and averted his gaze. Why sigh? He mumbled after a few seconds, deciding to get what was bothering him off of his chest. Pleased by her small victory, she decided to share a little bit of her knowledge with him. I'm going to tell you something that very few guys know, and even fewer women are willing to admit. Women are illogical. Naruto almost laughed. It was the exact same thing Jiraiya had been telling him for years. No shit. Annoyed by his interruption, she shot him a scowl. Just listen to me for a second. Sometimes, we don't even understand the things we do or why we feel the way we feel, but isn't that true for men, too? Why do you like Sakura? Why don't you like Hinata instead? Or Tenten? Or even me? What's so special about her? When he turned his head away to stare up at the ceiling, she knew she was getting through to him. Before he could come up with something else to say, she quickly continued. There's nothing you can do to make her look your way. All you can do is become the best man that you can be, and do it for yourself. If it's meant to be, she'll turn around and see you. If it's not, she won't. That's how life is, and remember, I used to chase after Sasuke, so I know what I'm talking about. She let her words soak in for a few seconds, carefully watching his face for any sign of change. This was the turning point. Either he would listen to her and cheer the fuck up, or he would completely disregard her argument and continue to mope. I'm hungry. Happy that she gotten through to him, Ino smiled and placed the tray on his lap as he sat up, removing the lid of the bowl for him so that he could eat. She watched him slurp down a few mouthfuls of noodles, eagerly studying him for his reaction. Sure, she could make katsudan or grilled fish, and he'd like it, since he'd probably never eaten that much of it, but this was ramen. If there was one thing Naruto knew about, it was ramen. It's pretty good. Not as good as Ichiraku's, but pretty good. Relief flooded through her. In truth, it had only been her second time making ramen, and the first time, her mother had been there to make sure she didn't mess anything up. Still, she couldn't let him know that. Of course it is. You think you'd learn by now that there's nothing I'm not good at. Naruto lifted his head and shot her a wide smile. Thanks, Ino. Staring into his happy, cerulean blue eyes, Ino felt her chest tighten. The feeling wasn't new to her, but for her to feel it while looking at Naruto didn't make any sense. She shook her head and pushed it to the back of her mind. So, I guess this would be a bad time to ask if I can stay another week. Despite all she'd said a few days ago, Naruto was still moping around the house. It wasn't blatant, but he still refused to go outside unless absolutely necessary, preferring to stay inside and study. Not that she minded. In fact, she liked having him around as a study buddy, if only because watching him concentrate helped to keep herself focused. The only complaint she had was the fact that he insisted on sighing every few minutes. Unable to take it any longer, she slammed her book shut and looked up at him. Naruto, if you're still upset about Sakura, and sigh. Before she could finish, Naruto hopped to his feet and stretched his arms towards the ceiling. I'm hungry. You want some ramen? Ino rolled her eyes. He wasn't even trying to be subtle about the fact that he didn't want to talk about it. Yeah, I'll take a cup. Shrimp if you have it. The test is in 5 days. Do you feel ready? Naruto asked, grabbing a couple of ramen cups from the cupboard and putting the kettle on the stove. The kunoichi nodded her head, a small grin appearing on her face. Thanks to the study guide from Godame, I might even be able to get 100 on it. Do you think I'll get in trouble if she finds out? I mean, I kind of have an unfair advantage over everyone else taking this test. It's only alright for you since you're not actually trying to join the department. Nah, Ba-chan knows you're capable of passing on your own. Besides, it's not like we had the answer key or anything. We still had to study our asses off to be ready for this test. I mean, most people have probably been preparing for months to take this thing. I guess you're right, she murmured, feeling a little bit better about it. He seemed to have that effect on people. Have you spoken to your parents? Trying to get rid of me? She asked, smirking in his direction. Shortly afterwards, Ino's face soured. I talked to my mom a couple of days ago. Apparently, she's been looking everywhere for me, and she demanded to know where I was staying. You didn't tell her, did you? Naruto asked, face taking on a nervous frown. Of course not. What would I say? Oh, don't worry mom, I'm living with this young, cute guy you know almost nothing about. Cute? Naruto asked, lifting an eyebrow. Ino tilted her head and looked him over. Well, you sort of cute in your own way, but I'm just exaggerating to illustrate my point. It wouldn't go over too well if I told her the truth. The whistling from the teapot interrupted their conversation, and Naruto quickly turned away to remove it from the stove. He poured the water into the 2 styrofoam cups and set them on the counter between them, glancing at the clock on the wall, so that he'd know exactly when the 3 minutes it took to cook ramen were up. Looking back at Ino, he continued their conversation. If your dad really wanted to find you, he could. Yamanaka rolled her eyes. I'm aware of that. Why hasn't he come looking for you yet? It's been almost a week since you've been staying here. She shrugged her shoulders. That's how he is. Even if he's worried sick, he's way too stubborn to give in and come looking for me. Which works out in both of our favors, because he'd probably hop into your mind and make you jump off of the Hokage monument if he found out we were living together. Naruto noticeably blanched. Why am I putting you up again? Because you like to watch me prance around your house in short shorts and a tank top. Ino teased. Wait, you knew? Ino paused, unsure of whether or not he was joking. His face looked completely serious, further piqued her curiosity. Unable to take it anymore, she ignored her common sense and asked, really? An awkward silence settled over the both of them. Had she simply laughed his question off, things would have continued as usual. They'd both have continued on joking and eating, neither one of them dwelling on his words. As it was, Naruto's face took on a surprised look, and his mouth opened and closed a few times as he fought to think up something to say. There was no real way to answer her question. While he didn't actively stare at her, he could admit that his eyes had run over her legs, chest, and butt a few times. After all, he was a man. His heart may not have been particularly interested in Ino, but his body was. Still, he couldn't tell her that. Grabbing and swallowing his ramen in a few long gulps, he tossed the empty cup into the trash can and walked off towards his room as casually as he could manage. I'm gonna go take a nap. Ino watched him leave with a frown. What was that? Had he really been checking her out without her noticing? She'd never caught him staring, but then again, she hadn't been trying to catch him. If that made sense. The worst part was that she really had no choice but to keep wearing the shorts. She'd only brought one pair of sweatpants with her, and she couldn't exactly wear those every single day. Besides the fact that Naruto would undoubtedly notice, it was also just plain gross. She could go home to grab more clothing, but she wasn't that confident in her ability to sneak into her room unnoticed by her mother and father. Ino sighed and took a bite from her ramen, leaning back against the couch. What was the big deal? She was used to guys checking her out. Hell, she liked it when they checked her out, and found it strange if their eyes didn't linger on her legs or ass for that extra second or two. Besides giving her a small confidence boost, it also assured her that she was still the hottest shit in the village. Shaking her head, she attempted to smile. She was being stupid. This was Naruto. Knowing him, this whole thing was a big, elaborate joke just to make her uncomfortable. Pranks were what he was known for, after all. Besides, he only had eyes for Sakura if his behavior every time she was brought up was any indication. This would all blow over within a couple of hours tops. "Dinner's ready," she called, trying to put all of the afternoon's awkwardness behind her. Remembering that he was supposed to be taking a nap, she hung her apron over the handle of the oven, and walked over to his room door, knocking on the thin piece of wood with the back of her knuckles. "Naruto, dinner's on." She heard a slight shuffling behind the door before it opened to reveal a groggy and slightly red-eyed Naruto. With him standing so closely in front of her, she for the first time realized how much bigger he was than her. She actually had to tilt her head back to look him in the eyes. "Thanks," he yawned, running his hand through his sleep-ruffled locks. Ino stared at him for a few seconds before abruptly turning around and heading towards the table. It was no use. The awkwardness was still there, and seemed to be growing with each passing second. Although she tried to forget about it, she still couldn't help but wonder if he was staring at her ass, as she walked in front of him. She seated herself at the table, and grabbed her chopsticks, waiting for Naruto to sit down before she put her hands together, and bowed her head. "Itadakimasu." Naruto tiredly mimicked her actions, exaggeratedly bowing his head until his forehead almost touched the table. They both began to eat at the same time, quietly chewing their meal. She'd been too tired to make anything complicated, so she'd thrown together a simple stew made of leftovers and rice. After a few awkward minutes, Ino glanced up from her food to look at him. "Hey, about this afternoon." As if he'd suddenly been given a shot of caffeine, Naruto straightened his back and grinned excitedly at her. "This is awesome. What's it called?" "Naruto. I am not Sakura. You can't dangle a compliment over my head and expect me to lose my train of thought." The slight widening of his eyes amused her. Apparently, he hadn't expected her to call him on his bullshit. Leveling her gaze on him, she put down her chopsticks to show him that she wanted his full attention. "About this afternoon." Continuing to eat, Naruto shrugged his shoulders. "It was a joke. I didn't think you'd take it seriously." A relieved sigh slipped past her lips. Either he was better at lying than she thought, or he was telling the truth. Since she really didn't want to picture him staring at her ass, she decided to believe him. "That's all I wanted to know. It's just that, it'd be awkward if you actually did have the hots for me since we're living together, and all." Naruto frowned, obviously displeased with something she'd said. "I can admit that you're pretty, but that doesn't mean I'm attracted to you or anything. Not every guy drools after the first pair of legs that walks by." A bit taken aback by his sudden scathing remark, Ino's eyes hardened in anger. "Are you saying that's all I am? Take it how you want." Normally, his words and attitude wouldn't have affected her. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to pass her off as a mindless slut due to the clothing she wore, and while she wasn't happy about it, she was certain that it wouldn't be the last. However, coming from Naruto, the words seemed to rip a gaping hole in her chest, probably because he was supposed to be her friend. She usually had impeccable self-control over her emotions, but it was all she could do to keep her eyes from moistening and her lips from trembling. So, glaring him straight in the eyes, she uttered one simple phrase. "Fuck you." Ino abruptly stood from the table and turned around, heading towards her bedroom before she fully lost her composure. She didn't get it. Just when they were getting along. Just when they'd found some common ground. It was always one step forward and two steps back with him. Of course, he wasn't the only one to blame. The two of them both had aggressive, belligerent attitudes, and it was inevitable that they'd clash viciously and frequently. However, she never in her wildest dreams imagined that they'd fight over something so pointless. Thanks to the food, Naruto mumbled to her closed door, standing to put both of their dishes in the sink. Although she heard him through the door, Ino refused to reply. As soon as she passed the test, she was out of there, and there was nothing anyone could do nor say to make her stay with that pompous asshole. Ignoring the hollow ache in her heart, Ino burrowed herself into her sleeping bag, hoping her dreams would at least keep her from thinking of Naruto. Ino felt like she was in a Cold War. She and Naruto weren't actively fighting, but there had been an obvious tension between the two of them for the past 4 days. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they didn't speak. She still made him dinner, as per her agreement, but much to her chagrin, he had stopped complimenting her, and made sure to eat with as stony of a face as he could manage. They didn't even study in the same room anymore, as Naruto would simply take some books and retreat to his own bedroom. Strangely, though, popping noises and smoke would seep from the edges of his closed door, making her curious as to exactly what kind of studying he was doing. Ino sighed and rubbed at her forehead. The test was only a day away, and here she was thinking about a stupid argument that had started because of a stupid misunderstanding. However, there was no way she was going to cave first. No way in hell. Shaking her head, she tried her best to focus on the words in front of her. The test came first. After she passed, and proved to her father that she was more than capable, she could go home, and never have to see Naruto's immature face ever again. The sound of the kitchen faucet distracted her, and she tilted her head back to see the boy she'd been thinking about filling a large glass with water. His eyes stayed focused on the running water, and it was obvious that he was doing his best not to look up at her. Which suited her just fine. He was just a distraction, and would probably hurt her chances more than he would help them. Still, despite her thoughts, she found herself watching him anyway. Naruto was a mystery. It killed her to admit it, but she wanted to know more about him. Even though they'd had an amazing talk before this whole ordeal started, he hadn't really offered anything about himself or his past. What happened to his parents? Did he know who they were? Where did he live before he moved out on his own? How had he turned out so well without anyone supporting him? There were dozens of questions that she wanted to ask, but couldn't. At least not now. Sakura could probably find these things out easily if she really wanted to, but somehow, she doubted that her friend would go through the trouble of coaxing the information out of Naruto for her. Surprisingly, after finishing the cup of water, Naruto looked over at her. Their eyes met for an awkward second or two, and without uttering a single word, he shuffled back to his bedroom. Her first reaction was to call out to him. Make him stick around for a little bit longer. She wasn't used to being alone, as at least one of her parents or teammates were always around to keep him company. Funnily enough, Naruto was the exact opposite. Letting loose a short breath of air, she closed the book and stood to her feet, deciding that she crammed as much information into her head as she could. The test was tomorrow morning, and she'd much rather go to bed early and get up with enough time to throw together some breakfast for herself and Naruto. They may not be the best of friends at the moment, but she still wanted him to do well. Nervousness didn't begin to describe what he felt at that moment. Sitting in the same exact room as the one he'd been in during that first chunin exam all those years ago, Naruto felt less than confident. Sure, he'd studied his ass off, and sure, he only needed 10 points less than what was needed to legitimately pass the test, but he couldn't help but felt as though this test would go the same as the previous one. The room was filled with interrogation hopefuls. Most of them seemed to be trying to look like tough guys, exposing their arm muscles, tattoos, and scars for all to see. He almost laughed when he recognized one of the guys as an old classmate from the academy. This particular kid was possibly the biggest crybaby he'd ever met, and had only managed to become a genin after pain had flattened Konoha. Even though the guy had shaved his head and gotten a bunch of tattoos, he still looked like a little bitch to Naruto. Against his will, his eyes shifted to the girl at the end of his row. He was pleased to see that Ino looked just as nervous as he did if the way she was viciously biting her thumbnail was any indication. Then again, she did have a lot riding on this. If she didn't pass, her ego would be shattered, and she'd have to crawl back home a failure. She'd be proving that her dad was right all along and that she wasn't cut out for the torture and interrogation department. They weren't on the best of terms, but he really didn't want to see her so defeated. The way her eyes had sparkled when she talked about her dreams still haunted him, and the thought of her being unable to reach her goals made his chest ache. As if she sensed him watching her, Ino turned her head to look at him. Just like the night before, their eyes met for a few awkward seconds. This time, though, the corners of Ino's lips twitched upwards. Naruto found this small action to be comforting. He felt as if she was telling him good luck. Or do your best. So, forgetting that they were feuding for the moment, he shot her a similar smile and a thumbs up. At that moment, the door to the classroom shot open. In walked Morino Ibiki, followed by Ino's father, and a group of relatively normal-looking shinobi. They wore simple flak and vests, surprising Naruto a bit. He'd expected them all to be trenchcoats wearing badasses. Unsurprisingly, Ino's dad instantly picked his daughter out of the crowd of potentials, and Naruto noticed with a wince that the man didn't look too pleased to see her there. In fact, he looked downright furious. Naruto glanced over at Ino to see that she too seemed to notice her father's glare by the nervous frown marrying her face. He sure as hell didn't want to be in her shoes at that moment. Listen up. Ibiki bellowed, instantly grabbing Naruto's attention. The man waited a few seconds for things to quiet down before continuing. At each aisle, a member of the torture and interrogation team is passing out your tests. Take one, and pass it on to the person next to you. Do not turn your papers over until you are told. You will have 2 hours to complete this test, and cheating of any kind will not be tolerated. Naruto noticed that he stared pointedly at both Ino and the lone user in the room, not so subtly implying that he'd be watching them much closer than anyone else. If you speak during the test, you will fail. If your handwriting is unreadable, you will fail. He looked around the room one last time. You may now turn your papers over and begin the test. Without wasting a second, Naruto flipped his packet of paper over to start the test, figuring that he'd need every second he could get to finish. The test mostly consisted of short answer questions, with a few long answers, and multiple choice questions popping up every 5 questions or so. He took a deep breath, and grabbed his pencil before carefully reading the first question. What is the correct procedure for processing and detaining a foreign prisoner? The blonde blinked. What the hell? He actually knew this one. Heart thumping, he quickly filled in the answer and moved on to the second question. When performing a strip search of a prisoner, what areas of the body need to be examined? He knew this one, too. If things kept going at this pace, he may just be able to pull it off. A quick glance over at Ino showed that she was also flying through the test, face tense and focused, as she scribbled down answer after answer. Every now and then she would flip her hair over her shoulder and sign, and he noticed that she had a nervous habit of chewing on the eraser of her pencil. They had just come upon the 1-hour mark when the first person stood up and walked to the front of the room, placing their paper face down on the desk in front of Ibiki. The way he carried himself suggested that he was certain he passed even though they wouldn't get the results for another few days. Shaking his head, Naruto looked down at his own paper. He was around 75% done, pretty damn good considering his track record when it came to tests. Then again, he had secretly used shadow clones to help him study, figuring that if they could help him learn S-ranked, they could help him learn 3 weeks worth of material in 5 days. Luckily, his theory proved to be correct, as he found most of the questions to be fairly easy. Barely 10 minutes since he'd last looked up, he watched Ino walk down the stairs to place her test face down on the desk with the others. As she was leaving the room, her father, Inoichi, stopped her at the door. He couldn't clearly see nor hear what he was fiercely whispering, but he did manage to pick out the words home, mother, and selfish. Coupled with the frown that appeared on Ino's face, it wasn't hard to figure out the gist of what he'd said. His heart stopped when Inoichi glanced up to look him straight in the eyes, and not wanting to seem overly suspicious, he casually lowered his eyes back to his paper. Inside, his stomach was doing backflips. Did he know about them? The fact that the two of them were living together. Inoichi's glance hadn't been malicious or anything, and since he was still currently living, he figured he was safe, at least for now. While he'd initially been trying to finish the test as soon as possible, he found that he was suddenly in no rush to walk to the front of the room. Inevitably, however, he finished, and with a heavy sigh, he stood to his feet and moved to place his test with the others. Just like he thought, Inoichi pulled him aside to talk. "You're a friend of Ino's, right?" the man asked, staring straight into Naruto's eyes. Well, sort of. More like a friend of a friend," he lied, hoping the conversation would end there. He tried to maintain eye contact so as not to seem suspicious, but fuck, Ino's dad was scary. While they may not be the best fighters when it came to hand combat, the Yamanaka clan's skills were dangerous. Unless you had a mind of absolute steel, they were capable of sucking any piece of information out of you that they wished. There were also rumors that the clan was behind the suicides of certain Wind Country officials, shortly after the joint attack by the Sand and Sound on Konoha. Needless to say, nothing had ever been proved, and unless someone in the clan suddenly decided to confess, nothing ever would be. Inoichi, apparently not sensing Naruto's nervousness, nodded his head, and continued. "That's good enough. I wanted to know if you'd be willing to talk some sense into Ino's head. She left home a couple of weeks ago, and refuses to tell her mother and I where she's staying." Resisting the urge to ask why don't you just find her, the young man swallowed roughly and averted his gaze. I think Sakura would be a much better choice." From the way Inoichi frowned, he could tell that he wasn't too keen on the idea of asking Sakura. Instead, the Yamanaka placed a large heavy hand on Naruto's shoulder, leveling his gaze on the younger blonde. "Tell you what, how about you just help me keep an eye on her?" Naruto paused. What the hell? Was Ino's dad trying to buddy up to him? While he liked the thought of having the Mindwalker on his side rather than against him, he really didn't want to get any closer to the man than he had to. "With all due respect, sir, I really don't think I should get involved in this issue between you and your daughter." Inoichi looked disappointed, but he nodded anyway. "I respect that." Now, Naruto's head was reeling. The way Ino had described her father made the guy seem like some kind of unreasonable monster, but he had yet to make a threatening move towards him at all. He was imposing, yes, but not threatening. Then again, he also didn't know that Ino was currently living in his apartment, and hopefully never would. "Thanks, Yamanaka-sen. I'll just." Naruto trailed off, inching towards the door. "Sure, go ahead." Slightly to Inoichi, he pulled open the door, and closed it behind him, relieved that he'd somehow managed to survive with his sanity intact. As soon as he stepped out of the classroom, though, Ino pounced on him. "What did my dad want?" she asked, cornflower blue eyes searching for answers. Apparently, she'd been watching them talk from the doorway. Deciding it'd be too much trouble to come up with some bullshit story, he decided to just tell her the truth. "He wanted me to keep an eye on you." "Are you serious? He's trying to use my friends to spy on me?" Ino exclaimed, fury evident in her tone. Naruto raised his eyebrows. "We're friends now?" Looking at him, as if he just asked the stupidest question in history, the girl furrowed her brows. "Well, yeah. Aren't we?" "I wasn't sure, since you were ignoring me, and all." Ino snorted. "You weren't trying too hard to talk to me, either." "I thought you hated me." "Well, I don't." The two of them stared awkwardly at each other for a few seconds, both feeling more than a little stupid about how they'd acted towards each other. That test was kinda stressful, and I'm ready to let loose and have some fun. What do you think? Ino asked, breaking the short silence. Naruto shrugged his shoulders, zipping up his jacket in the process. Sure. What do you want to do? I hear the lake in the park's frozen over. How about we go ice skating? Almost immediately, Naruto's face stiffened. It was the exact same thing he'd suggested to Sakura the night Ino showed up on his doorstep. It almost seemed like too much of a coincidence, but he doubted Ino would suggest they go ice skating just to spite him. Forcing a smile, he nodded. Sure. Ino's face momentarily lit up before dropping into a frown. Oh, shit, I forgot. My skates are at home. Well, since your dad is here, you should be able to sneak by your mom, right? Ino snorted. You think so, wouldn't you? My mom has some kind of daughter sensor that goes off whenever I'm within 20 feet of her. She'd notice me right away. What if I get them for you, then? Naruto suggested. Ino paused. Allow Naruto to go into her room without her there to monitor him. Every one of her senses were telling her that it was a bad idea. Even if he was more naive and innocent than most, he was still a guy, and all men seemed to have the uncontrollable urge to raid a woman's underwear drawer. Still, though, ice skating had been her idea. Besides, she could see his movements from the opposite rooftop. She wouldn't be able to see everything, but hopefully the fact that she'd only be 20 feet away would be enough to deter him from swiping a pair of her panties. Fine, but if you touch anything, I'll kill you, Ino spat, crossing her arms over her chest. Confused as to what she meant, he'd have to touch her skates to get them, right? He shrugged his shoulders and nodded, following her as she led the way to her home. Naruto landed on the roof of the Yamanaka flower shop, looking around to make sure no one was watching. It'd be hard to explain why he was essentially breaking into the house of one of the members of the Yamanaka clan. He glanced back at Ino, noticing her frowning at him from the opposite rooftop. She raised her hand and deepened her scowl, reminding him that he only had 5 minutes to go in and out of her room. It was painfully obvious that she didn't trust him, but he really didn't understand why not. What was so important that she didn't want him to see? Or did she think he was going to steal something? Shaking his head, he opened her window and slipped through it, being as quiet as humanly possible. Before he even had the chance to look around, he could tell that this room was Ino's. The strong scent of wildflowers immediately punched him in the nose, almost causing him to cough and gasp for air. He normally liked the smell, but not when it was this suffocating. It took a few seconds, but his nose eventually adjusted enough for him to begin looking for her skates. The room was in perfect order, everything seemingly in its place. The walls were light lavender, and her bedspread was a darker redder violet. If there was any doubt in his mind before that this room was Ino's, it was gone now. It was surprisingly plain considering the girl's loud and flamboyant personality, but perhaps she was like him in that she preferred to live more simply. Naruto walked around her room in slight awe, realizing that this was the first time he'd ever been inside of a girl's room. He ran his hand over the dozens of perfume and makeup bottles sitting in front of her vanity mirror, and he even leaned down to smell a few of the ones that looked interesting. He then moved over to her bedside table to look at the pictures perched neatly on its surface. There was the obligatory picture of Asuna, herself, Shikamaru, and Choji, as Genin. Next to that was a picture of them, and on the opposite side of the first picture was a photograph of the Konoha 12, minus Sasuke, plus I, standing in front of the Hokage Tower, after the Akatsuki had been decimated. He also noticed a picture of a toddler Ino, and her parents, all three of them smiling widely at the camera. It was hard to believe that the young, hip blonde guy in the picture was the same large, overbearing bear he'd exchanged words with barely half an hour ago. Remembering his mission, Naruto floated over to her closet to begin looking for her ice skates. According to Ino, they were on a shelf in the top left corner next to some old stuffed animals. He spotted them within seconds, but just as he was about to reach for the shoes, a flash of bright purple poking out of her dresser caught his eye. Curiosity getting the better of him, he grabbed the purple cloth and pulled only to be smacked in the face by the item. Back, he said, rubbing at his stinging eye. What the hell? He stared at the object for a few seconds before realizing exactly what it was, her bra. Resisting the urge to throw it across the room, Ino would definitely notice. He quickly stuffed it back into the dresser, but not before glancing at the tag sticking out of the back. 34C, he mumbled appraisingly, a bit surprised that they were that large. She was more than a full cup size larger than Sakura. Never mind how he knew how large, or small, the medic nin's breasts were. Suddenly feeling a little too much like his perverted former senseis, Naruto reached up and grabbed her skates before he did something that would get himself killed. Without so much as a second glance, he slipped out of the window and hopped over to where Ino was waiting. You got them. Ino cheered, a bright smile flashing across her face. Just as quickly, her face fell into a menacing glare. You didn't touch anything, did you? Naruto almost choked. However, reasoning that there was no way she could have seen him from the window, he decided that bullshitting would be the best course of action. I was only in there for a few minutes. Would I have had time to touch anything? She eyed him suspiciously for a few seconds before sighing. I guess not. Not noticing the relief that poured into Naruto's face, she turned around and sped off towards the park. I'll race you. Cheater. He yelled after her, quickly giving chase. As he ran, he felt the smile on his face grow wider and wider. This was going to be fun. When was the last time you went ice skating? Naruto asked, looking down at Ino. The girl was currently holding onto his arm for dear life, struggling not to fall for the 100th time. Ino poked out her bottom lip. Hey, it's only cold enough to ice skate a few weeks out of the year, and I'm a busy girl. Well, you'll never get any better if you keep clinging to me like this. Here. He removed himself from her grip and skated away, leaving her to fend for herself. Predictably, she immediately lost her balance and began to topple towards the ice. Just before she fell, however, he appeared behind her and caught her by the underarms, hoisting her back up into a standing position with ease. She looked over her shoulder and glared at him. Asshole. Her anger was quickly replaced by surprise when his cool hand found hers in a comfortable grip. Relax, I've got you. We're just gonna skate like this for a while until you get the hang of it. Okay. Remember, don't look down. Just keep your eyes straight and concentrate on using the sides of your blades to push. Still in a mild state of shock, Ino slowly nodded her head. She quickly glanced around at the other people skating and hanging out near the lake, wondering how they looked to everyone else. Not that it mattered, but she wouldn't want any strange rumors getting back to her friends or parents. Especially not her parents. Luckily, it seemed as if no one was paying them any attention, so she sighed and relaxed like he suggested, deciding to just enjoy being led around the makeshift rink. His calm demeanor was rubbing off on her, and before long, she didn't even have to think about pushing the sides of her blades against the ice. You're doing great, Ino. Naruto yelled from behind her, snapping her out of her thoughts. She hadn't noticed, but sometime within the last few seconds she'd been skating on her own. Fully realizing what that meant, she suddenly and promptly fell on her butt. Would you stop? You had it. He asked, skidding to a stop in front of her. Annoyed, Ino leaned back on her hands and frowned up at him. Thanks for letting me fall. How did you become king of the ice, anyway? The young man laughed, turning around to skate backwards in circles around her. It took me 3 winters of hard work and falling on my ass to get this good. You're smarter than me and have better balance, so you'll be able to pick it up much faster. Plus, you have an awesome teacher. Wait, you mean no one taught you? Did you learn together with your friends? She asked, furrowing her brows. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. I didn't really have friends. I just spent a lot of time watching other people, so after a while, it eventually sunk in. Sorry, Ino murmured, not sure what she was apologizing for. She'd known he was an orphan, but she figured that he at least had some form of a support system. After all, how could a child raise himself? The thought of a child cooking, cleaning, and buying his own things was unfathomable. Naruto had to have had some help from someone. The young man shrugged again. It's okay. I mean, when I finally got it, it was the best feeling I'd ever felt in my life. It taught me that you could do anything with hard work and a strong will. Ino smiled and raised her hands to him. Help me up. I'm going to get this even if it kills me. Ino sighed, leaning back in Naruto's bathtub. After 3 straight hours of falling on her ass, skating, and falling on her ass, she had finally gotten the hang of basic skating. While she wasn't nearly as agile or fast as Naruto, she could now skate comfortably at his side with little to no effort. She was amazed by the patience he'd shown in teaching her. Though he laughed at her every now and then, he never got upset or frustrated whenever she did something wrong, and even encouraged her every step of the way. His attitude had been completely different than what she'd expected of him. Ino dunked her head under the water. The more she learned about Naruto, the less she understood. Sakura had always described him as loud, brash, and impatient, but the man she'd been living with for the past couple of weeks had been almost the complete opposite. Which Naruto was the real one? The one that only she apparently knew, or the one that everyone else knew? Did anyone else even know that he had 2 sides? Re-emerging from the depths of the bathtub, she sighed and pulled her wet bangs out of her face. God, he was frustrating. Her natural curiosity and his unwillingness to say much about himself were a horrible match, and if she spent another week with him, she was worried that she may drive herself crazy trying to understand him. She pulled the stopper out of the tub and stepped out to dry off, deciding that she'd taken long enough. Naruto was probably more tired than she was since things like tests weren't his strong point, and he'd spent a lot of energy teaching her how to ice skate. Bath is free, she said, dabbing at her damp hair with a towel, as she walked into the living room. Naruto downed the rest of his cup of ramen in one gulp, and nodded, standing from the couch, and throwing a towel over his shoulder, as he strolled to the bathroom. Ino claimed his recently vacated spot on the couch, finding the heat he left behind to be extremely comfortable. Since she was too exhausted to really fuss with her hair, she decided to simply braid it up into 2 pigtails. Her fingers nimbly separated and entwined her hair, using the skill that had been taught to her years ago by her mother. Just as she was finishing up, Naruto opened the door and emerged from the bathroom. Done already? She asked, using a piece of ribbon to tie off her braid. When he didn't answer, she lifted her head to look at him, only to notice that he was staring at her blankly. What? Pigtails, he said, expression remaining the same. Mistaking his statement for an insult, she frowned. They're convenient. No, I mean, I like them. Oh? Feeling as if she should say something else, she averted her gaze and shrugged. They only took like 2 seconds. When Naruto continued to stare, she found herself rambling. It keeps my hair from getting frizzy, but I don't like to do it all the time because it gives me split ends. They look nice. Thanks. Naruto stared at her for a few more seconds before coughing and finally looking away. Since it's been a long day, I think I'm just going to turn in. Yeah, me too. She stood up and yawned, shuffling over to her bedroom. Good night. Night, he replied, doing the same. Just as she was about to enter her room, Ino paused. There was something that still bothered her, and she felt that if she didn't say it now, she'd never work up the courage to say it again. Naruto. When he turned his head and shot her a quizzical look, she continued. Next time, I mean, if we ever fight again, let's not do this. Not talk, I mean. It's stupid. Yeah. He opened his mouth, as if to say something else, but promptly shut it, piquing Ino's curiosity. Night, he said again, entering his room and closing the door behind him. Ino watched him leave with a frown. What was he going to say? The look on his face had been one of confusion and uncertainty. Even though it had probably been nothing, she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd had something important to say. Something that would give her a little more insight into who he was, as a person. It was at that moment that she decided. She would figure out the puzzle that was Uzumaki Naruto. Thanks for watching my video, see you next time, till then sayonara.